In the small, sleepy town of Willow's End, where fog clung like a shroud to the cobblestone streets and the air carried the eternal scent of damp earth, 17-year-old Alice Munro lay awake. Her room, on the second floor of the old Munro house, faced the gnarled branches of the ancient oak that scratched at her window like the fingers of the dead. It was the witching hour, the time when the veil between worlds was whispered to be thinnest, and tonight, like every night for the past week, a shadow lingered just beyond the glass. Alice's heart thudded painfully against her ribs as she peered into the darkness. The figure was there again, a silhouette darker than the night, standing motionless. The street lamp from the corner of the lane cast a weak glow, but it was enough to outline the figure's broad shoulders and the eerie stillness with which it watched her. With each passing night, it had inched closer to her window, and tonight, it was close enough for Alice to see the vague shimmer of eyes. Willow's End was a town steeped in the lore of the supernatural, surrounded by dense forests that were older than memory and whispered of spirits and creatures that slipped in and out of the shadows. The Munro house, a sprawling Victorian relic adorned with spires and stained glass, held its own secrets. It had stood, stoic and silent, for over a century, watching generations of Munros grow and fade like the leaves of the oak outside Alice's window. Alice, with her wild, dark curls and a skeptical mind, had never believed in ghost stories. She was a senior at Willow's End High, known for her sharp intellect and the logical mind that had debunked many local legends among her peers. But the figure outside her window tested her disbelief, a nightly visitor that logic couldn't explain. Her parents, lost in their world of historical research, attributed her tales to an overactive imagination. "It's just the branches, darling," her mother had said, brushing off the old house's creaks and groans. But the figure had no resemblance to the benign trees that whispered in the wind. Each night, as Alice's digital clock displayed 3 a.m., the figure appeared. The first night, it had been near the old garden shed, barely visible. The second, it had moved to the gnarled apple tree halfway across the yard. Now, it was mere feet from her window. Tonight, its presence felt oppressive, suffocating, as if the air around her thickened. Curiosity mingled with fear, compelling Alice to confront the shadow. She dressed quietly, her movements deliberate, heart pounding with a mix of dread and an unexplainable thrill. Slipping out of her room, she moved silently down the staircase, the old wood moaning under her weight despite her careful steps. The air was chillier outside, the mist a cold kiss against her skin. The garden, bathed in silver moonlight, seemed a different realm, each leaf and blade of grass edged in ghostly light. The figure stood immobile by the hydrangeas, just beneath her window now. As she stepped closer, the figure's features became clearer, and Alice stopped, her breath catching in her throat. It was a man, or something that once resembled a man, his face pale, almost translucent, eyes hollow with a depthless despair. He wore what seemed like an old-fashioned suit, the material merging with the shadows. "Who are you?" Alice's voice was a whisper, her body tense, ready to flee. The figure's lips moved, but no sound came. He pointed toward the house, or perhaps to something beyond it, his expression mournful. A cold breeze swept through the garden, rustling the leaves and carrying a whisper. Below, chilled to the bone, Alice stepped back. The figure's eyes bore into her, a silent plea evident in his gaze. Driven by a resolve to unearth the truth, she decided to explore the only place she hadn't considered before, the cellar. The Munro cellar was seldom used, a place that stored old furniture and boxes of forgotten artifacts. As Alice descended the creaky steps, the air grew colder, the musty smell of decay filling her nostrils. Her flashlight beam darted across the room, illuminating cobwebs and dust motes dancing like spirits in the light. Her heart thudded loudly as she moved deeper, the back of the cellar shrouded in darkness. Then, her light fell on something unexpected, a small door she had never noticed, hidden behind a large armoire. It was old, the wood swollen with damp, the paint peeling like scabs. Alice's hands trembled as she reached for the handle. The door opened with a protesting groan, revealing a narrow tunnel that burrowed further into the earth. The air here was stale, heavy with the scent of earth and something faintly metallic. She pressed forward, driven by a need to know. The tunnel ended abruptly at a small chamber, the walls lined with moisture. In the center, illuminated by her shaking light, was a grave. No tombstone, just a mound of earth, and at its head, a small, tarnished plaque. "Here lies Jonathan Corbett, wronged, and forgotten." A gasp escaped her lips. Jonathan Corbett, the name was familiar, a piece of lore her parents had once discussed. He was a man accused of witchcraft, buried alive near the old Munro property. His innocence was proven too late. As realization dawned, a cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing her flashlight and plunging her into darkness. Heart racing, she felt a presence behind her, the air shifting. A hand, cold and firm, settled on her shoulder, and a voice, clearer now, whispered, "Thank you." Bolting from the chamber, Alice didn't stop until she burst into the night air, the house looming silently behind her. The figure was gone, and in the nights that followed, it did not return. But the air around the old Monroe house felt lighter, somehow, as if a long-held breath had been finally released. Alice never spoke of that night, keeping the secret of Jonathan Corbett's restless spirit to herself. The town continued to whisper its ghost stories in the misty evenings, but Alice knew better now. She knew that sometimes, beneath the layers of legend and fear, there were just truths waiting to be uncovered, and souls waiting to be set free.